شهر الطاعة والإيمان، شهر الرحمة والغفران، شهر الطاعة والإيمان، شهر الرحمة والغفران.
أيامك خير الأيام
يا رمضان،
يا شهر صيام وقيام.
يا رمضان،
أيامك خير الأيام
يا رمضان،
يا شهر صيام وقيام.
يا رمضان.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, dear brothers and sisters, you are all well and progressing smoothly through the holy month of Ramadan. We were discussing the fasting of the limbs and faculties of the body. In relation to the tongue, we had mentioned one or two points, and I read an incident with Ayatollah Hassanzadeh Amoli mentioned in his memoirs. Here I want to recite another memoir of this holy figure, and how not controlling one's talking faculty, not controlling one's tongue, how that can bar one from one's growth in spiritual wayfaring. Another of his memoirs, he writes, on the eve of Sunday, the 12th of Safar, 1398 after Hijrah, which is the 22nd of January 1978. An event took place for me which I have rendered in verse in the 12th section of the Book of the Heart, which is a book of poems he's composed, in the following manner. Shall I recount for you a story that took place once upon a time? One night I shut the door behind me, sitting in solitude, deliberating. So whilst he was deliberating in solitude, in the middle of the night, he experienced a vision. Pondering deeply into the origin and end of existence, i.e. deliberating and pontificating over Allah, the fact that He's the first, He's the last, He's the outer, He's the inner. Pondering deeply into the origin and end of existence, being totally unaware of myself. Here he's describing the process of detachment now, as he's progressing through his pontification. And now the vision starts. I saw needle and thread approaching my lips, knitting with my body and soul burning. So in this vision, his lips are being knitted. And then those who were knitting his lips with needle, in this vision, it wasn't happening in the physical realm of existence. They said, this is the punishment for one who let their tongue go loose. Since your tongue under your supervision is not, they will knit your lips. I was so distressed from this state as if I became quicksilver, like mercury. And from this status of mine I saw hell. I tasted the punishment of Barzakh. Now, letting his tongue go loose, he didn't do that in a manner which was in contradiction with the Sharia. Rather, he didn't control, or he let his tongue loose in a manner which goes against the spirit of the law, which goes against the principles of the tariqah. Now the tariqah has an infinite number of layers. Now which layer he let his tongue go loose, he doesn't mention. Sometimes someone with who has irfan and has knowledge of irfan, of mysticism, he may let his tongue loose in this sense, that he speaks of matters which the general public are not aware of, or may even attack, or may even suddenly acquire the wrong beliefs as a result of a person's letting the tongue go loose. And then in such manner, they're not doing anything haram, but they will be punished for it. And they're punished for it whilst here in this world, and they undergo a vision of hell, and the hell is the hell of Barzakh, naturally, and they will be punished for it. Like everyone will be punished in the hell after death. But they, because of their spiritual detachments they have, and the visions they have, they experience it whilst living in this realm. The advantage of undergoing such states and seeing one's status, one's hell status, here in this world is you can then refine yourself, and then when you die you will avoid the hell of Barzakh. Now you may say, why would such an action, which is not in contradiction with the Sharia, why should that be punished in such a manner? Why is there punishment in hell for something which is not in contradiction to the Sharia? Imam Khomeini answers this question in Adab al-Salat, in his book The Etiquettes of Prayer, where he says, look, we have different degrees of heaven and hell. We have a hell of actions and we have a heaven of actions. And here, anything which you do against the Sharia, you would go into that hell. If you, for example, backbite, if you don't execute your prayers, if you listen to haram music, if you, for example, God forbid, drink intoxicants and so on and so forth, these are against the Sharia, and you would have to burn or be punished in whatever way or form. Every sin will be manifested differently, but you committed the sin, and you are your actions. Your actions are in unity with you, not that you're going to be punished from outside. And heaven too, we have a basic level of heaven, the heaven of action. But then Imam Khomeini says we have a higher level in heaven and hell called the heaven or hell of ethics. For example, if you forgive people, even though they did you wrong, but you go out of your way and you forgive them, that is something which is very noble. It's part of the noble ethical traits. Here you will acquire a higher level of heaven than someone who has just mastered the Sharia but hasn't incorporated any noble ethical traits. Or for example, if you don't undergo or any grudges against anyone, and many other of the noble ethical traits, you will acquire a higher level of heaven than someone who only commits themselves to the do's and don'ts of the Sharia. But the level of hell and the hell of ethics, here, this would be where you don't have a forgiving nature and you don't forgive people. Or for example, if you're jealous, even if you disclose your jealousy, that would be in contradiction to the Sharia. But let's say you're jealous and you don't disclose your jealousy, that would go against the tariqah, and you'll go to the hell of ethics. If you hold on to grudges, the hell of ethics. If you don't forgive people, the hell of ethics. That is your status there. And then there are even higher levels of heaven and hell, but I won't go into that. There's no need for our purposes right now. But the point Imam Khomeini makes is this, that the punishment in the hell of ethics is more scorching and painful than the hell of action. Because the hell of ethics is the cause of the hell of action. And therefore these are more important, even though the hell of action is important too. No one's denying that. But these fuel the hell of action. These are the precursors to the hell of action. The same with the heaven of ethics. They are a precursor to the heaven of action. If you forgive people, don't hold on to grudges, you're not jealous, you're not miserly, and so on and so forth, and have the noble ethical traits, the level of heaven you will experience in the heaven of ethics is much higher, it's much elevated, much more lofty than the heaven of action. Now, sometimes someone may have the heaven of ethics, but because they weren't Muslim, they failed in relation to the Sharia, and they may be faced with the hell of action. But they had the heaven of ethics. The light of the heaven of ethics can overrule the darkness of the hell of action. And for these people, we have traditions where their fate will be such that they'll be in hell because they had no aqa'id, for example. They failed in their doctrine and action in according to the Sharia, because they were, let's say, a polytheist or a non-Muslim. But since they had the heaven of action, in that hell where they reside, Allah says, I won't let the fire harm them. We'll give them a residence in hell, but we won't let the fire harm them, and we will feed them morning and night. You see, we have such traditions, plenty of them. And so this classification is important, that okay, Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amuli, for whatever reason, he acted in a manner that was against the tariqah, letting his tongue go loose for whatever reason, but it wasn't against the Sharia, but it wasn't on a par with the tariqah. And so he would be punished, because the light of the heaven of, or the light of the hell of ethics overrules the darkness of the hell of ethics overrules the light of the heaven of action. And so that overruling here entailed his lips being knitted. It caused him pain. And then this pain he had, he took lesson from it, and he can refine himself now. He knows what the problem is. In his vision, he was told what the problem is. This is all spiritual wayfaring, practical. And then one refines oneself and relieves one's hell of ethics, and then further acquires one's heaven of action. Then he continues and writes, O my dear, until the mouth is not closed, the heart... Yes, O my dear, until the mouth is not closed, the heart will not open up. In an ode I have composed, the mentor said, if you lock your mouth, the heart will open. I do not believe you will understand what this issue is about. If you lock your mouth, maximally, and we explained the different layers of turning away from speaking, but if you lock your mouth, the heart will open up. The heart will open up. And then, when the heart opens up, you're going to see things. You're going to attain proximity with Allah in a new dimension, a new horizon. Lady Maryam also, she would not speak maximally. Her heart opened up. And then when she gave birth to Nabi Isa, the opening of her heart is manifested in Nabi Isa being not only Abdullah, but also speaking. Not only being a true servant of Allah, a servitude which is higher than the station of messengership, but was speaking from the cradle. Okay. Then Ayatollah Hassan Zada continues, ponder and deliberate over this noble tradition that is one of the luminous traditions. Verily Adam, peace be upon him, when his children and children's children became abundant, once they were speaking with him, and he was silent. They said, O Father, what's the matter that you're not speaking with us? He replied, O sons, when Allah discharged of me from his presence, he promised me and said, cease your talking and you will return to my presence. So this is a very important tool where silencing the tongue has a lot of spiritual benefits, and layer after layer we should incorporate these with practice. But we shouldn't jump to step 3. Let's go slowly and first start and refrain from the ills, the haram, the Sharia dictated haram actions of the tongue. There we start, and then we can grow after that. So for example, after 6 months, if you avoid saying any haram with your mouth, then you can consider going to the next level of silencing your tongue. Okay. Another of the faculties or limbs that needs silencing, as we said, when it comes to the tariqah of fasting, the essence of fasting is the silencing of one's limbs, one's outer or inner and inner faculties. The other is our hearing faculty. Now this is connected with the tongue, I suppose, because here you shouldn't hear anything. Now if they are haram things, you have to refrain from hearing from them. For example, haram music should be refrained from. If the music is halal in nature, it's okay to hear. But once you start growing, if that halal form of music is futile, albeit not haram, then you have to refrain from that too. Although it's possible that there's a given music or song which is of benefit too. For example, in a song, the lyrics are of an important content. That would be okay to listen. But some forms of songs, they may not be haram, but they may be futile. And for someone who's growing in spiritual wayfaring, even from that kind of, those kind of things, they have to gradually refrain from. But haram things, it's poisonous. You shouldn't hear. And backbiting is something really which is affecting many people, and many people may not be aware that listening to backbiting bears the same connotations and implications for the same as the actual backbiter. So if you're in a room and there's backbiting, very politely try to change the discussion, or if you can't and there's no point in changing it and you see no one's going to listen, very politely leave the room so that you don't pollute your ears. Another form of haram which we have to refrain from hearing, which is affecting many people, especially in the West, but maybe in the East as well, is listening to the dilemmas which are raised against Islam. Listening to people from different ideologies, be it Buddhist, Hindu, or Christian, Jewish, their ideologies, and listening to what they have to say, and especially when they attack Islam or question things in relation to Islam. You should refrain from listening to such things. These things make your existence najis. You know, in the Sharia, when we say there are 2 forms of water, voluminous water and less than voluminous water, little water, qalil, and voluminous water, khor water, when a najis enters a qalil water, little water, all that water becomes najis. Now, on the level of the tariqah, water is one's knowledge. You can either be qalil water, little water, or voluminous water. But if your knowledge is limited and is little, when a religious dilemma, which is on a par with a najis material, when it enters upon you who possess little knowledge, that will make you najis throughout. Okay, let's say if you possess voluminous knowledge and you want to reply to them and you have all the scaffolding to do that, knowledge-wise, it would be okay. But if you fear you may not be able to answer and it creates doubt, once the doubt penetrates into you, you become existentially najis. Here, that would be a big blow to one's spiritual wayfaring. Now, in the Holy Quran, chapter 6, verse 68, وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ فِي آيَاتِنَا فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ. So when you see those who enter dialogue, but in an offensive way, given the context of this verse, they enter into discourse with you in an offensive way with respect to or concerning our signs, the divine signs. For example, they enter attacking revelation, for example. فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْهُمْ. So turn away from them. You have to turn away. Until حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ. Until they enter into another dialogue. They change subject. So here, listening to pseudo-religions, deviated ideologies, this would be problematic, even on a par with the Sharia, especially when you're at risk of, there's risk of your faith being compromised. You shouldn't mess around with yourself. There's no need to enter and listen to such things. Islam is a very complete religion. One has to listen to the true scholars and take heed. Also in chapter 28, verse 55, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا اللَّغْوَ أَعْرَضُوا عَنْهُ. So when they listen to ill talk, the believers, they turn away from it. Wherever there's ill talk, you have to move yourself away. It pollutes you. It contaminates you. As I said, these are all faculties of the body, but there's a unity between one's body faculties and the soul. And therefore, whatever you see which is haram, or which is not on a par with the Sharia or the Tariqah, it's polluting your soul at that very time. When you hear something, it pollutes your soul at that very time. There's a unity between body and soul. And that's why with the hijab, when you're covering certain parts of the body, you're covering your soul, which is synonymous to chastity. You're enhancing your chastity, and so on and so forth. Anyway, then another faculty which needs controlling and which needs silencing is that of seeing. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُم. And in the following verse, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ. Here, tell the believing men that to lower their gaze. And it then continues, and to preserve their private parts. In the following verse it says, tell the believing women to lower their gaze and to protect their private parts. Here, the lowering of the gaze is where we want to just speak a few words. The eyes too. The eyes need controlling. The eyes shouldn't wander around too much. One should refrain, to start off with, by seeing haram things. When you surf on the internet, don't let the reins of control go loose. For a single moment, you can click on a certain site and you go into the site, you're contaminating your soul as you're looking at the haram. Although there are many other dimensions of how to lower one's gaze, this is a minimum. to lower your gaze. But there are high levels. This was on a par with the Sharia, but lowering one gaze also applies to many different layers of the tariqah. For example, lower your gaze in relation to your good deeds, because you can easily become self-conceited. Lower your gaze. Don't attribute everything to yourself. See everything from Allah. Lower your gaze. Once one is in love with Allah, they will never attribute things to themselves. They will always attribute to Allah. Once one is in love with Allah, they will never even start looking at haram. They only look at Allah with the eyes of the heart. They won't preoccupy themselves with looking at haram. Here, good deeds can sometimes be more dangerous than bad deeds. In a sacred tradition, it recites that bury your bad deeds, but bury your good deeds under the bad deeds. Bury your good deeds under, because you can become self-conceited. You can acquire the hell of ethics. The hell of ethics can be acquired. When you keep on doing good deeds, you become susceptible to it. No one is saying don't do good deeds. Of course you have to do them. No one is saying don't incorporate the noble ethical traits. Of course you have to do it. No one is saying don't go against the Sharia. Of course you have to not go against the Sharia. No one is saying to go against the Sharia. Of course you shouldn't go against the Sharia. But the thing is, you may become self-conceited. You make yourself susceptible to the hell of ethics. The tradition says bury the good deeds under your bad deeds. Your bad deeds may give you the hell of action, but your good deeds may be such that it may lead to spiritual illnesses of a nature where you're creating your hell of ethics. That's worse. So one has to be careful that one has to lower one's gaze in relation to one's good deeds, in relation to the heavenly rewards. One reads of traditions that if you do this X action, you'll be rewarded so much and so much. These things can lead to complacency in people who are not prepared spiritually. And that kind of complacency that I've received all these rewards, as if Allah owes you something. He's indebted to you. One has to be careful. Lowering one's gaze in these issues applies. So, on a par with the Sharia, you have to lower your gaze in relation to the haram, and if you master it, in relation to other more delicate and fine matters of the Sharia and tariqah. But the verse also speaks of guarding your private parts. Now, that on a par with the Sharia, God forbid, one shouldn't enter haram relations of adultery and other than adultery. Now, I know no one is suffering from that amongst the viewers. However, guarding one's private parts also has layers of the tariqah which one must abide by. Here, private parts, okay, on the outside it's referring to the genitalia, but on the esoteric layer, as we said, there's a unity between body and soul. Wherever you see a part of the body mentioned in the Holy Quran, its esoteric meaning refers to the soul, because there's a unity between body and soul. So you have to guard your soul too, your immaterial soul. In the same way that you're guarding your private parts, guard also your immaterial soul. How? Don't let it be penetrated. Don't let it be trodden upon or abused by haram things, haram thoughts. Don't let your soul be penetrated upon or abused by or trodden upon worldly incentives, all be they halal. And a higher degree, don't let it be trodden upon by incentives of the hereafter. Remember the layers of riyah we were discussing? And that for each layer of riyah, there's a layer of ikhlas that has to compensate that and relieve you from riyah. These are important points here. that this silencing of the faculties, which is the essence of fasting of the tariqah, here it has to be, and if you want a complete fast, this has to be observed. Then we enter the smelling faculty and the fact that we shouldn't smell anything which can lead us to haram. Now this may apply for those who wear perfume. Wearing perfume is okay, but for sisters, they have to be careful not to wear perfume if they know non-mahram men, or they will encounter non-mahram men at the workplace or at university. They should refrain from perfumes. Men too, if they see women are wearing it, be they Muslim or non-Muslim, men should refrain from that presence, because it may lead to excitation of a haram nature. Or even if it's not of a nature which is dictated against in the Sharia, it may be go against the principles of the tariqah. Just because you're not biologically excited, okay, that's the limits laid by the Sharia, but the limits laid by the tariqah is much more. When you may not be biologically excited, but it diverts your attention in a way that you're polluting yourself, polluting your mind, and so on and so forth. Starting comparing with others. It's not that, these things can be a bit delicate. So smelling very bad things. You have to refrain from that. That it may harm your bodily constitution, but bad things also, like things like the odor of alcohol or drugs or even these kind of things, smelling them would not be acceptable, and one has to maximally refrain from smelling such haram things. Okay. In relation to tasting, now naturally this refers to the tasting of food. Tasting has to be controlled also. It has to be silenced, because if you keep on eating and tasting, it may stimulate your animalistic dimension, and then you keep wanting to do it. Animals are ready to taste anything. Animals eat whenever they want. But you're a human. You have to control this animal dimension within, so that you can transcend this physical realm. We eat, animals eat, but we eat in a different manner. We have to control this tasting dimension. Also, tasting anything which may inactivate or suppress one's intellect, one's rationality. One has to refrain from that. And that's one of the core reasons why alcohol is haram and has been deemed forbidden in the Islamic Sharia. Sometimes there are foods which are acceptable on a par with the Sharia, but they may be ambiguous. For example, you go to a Muslim and they say this food is halal, but you have your doubts, for example. They say, for example, this meat is halal, but for whatever reason, and it's a legitimate reason, but you have your doubts. So you don't buy from that shop, for example. Here, even though you would consuming from that shop where the Muslim owner tells you it's halal, if you refrain with this intention that, oh Allah, although your Sharia allows me, but out of precaution, to protect my soul, to get closer to you, Allah, I'll refrain from it. Or even with things, non-meat products, like sweets, for example, or any other product, milk, biscuits. from even a non-Muslim, and it has no haram ingredients, but for whatever reason you're suspicious in some way or form or another, and it's ambiguous to you, maybe in more ways than one. I don't want to enter the details right now, but it would be acceptable for you on a part of the Sharia to consume that biscuit or milk or sweet. However, you want to exercise precaution. This is very noble, with this intention that I want to refrain from polluting my soul, and oh Allah, I'm doing this for you so I get closer to you. Now, if you do that, that's very noble. But you shouldn't ruin this good deed by being judgmental against others were they to go and consume from that shop. Sometimes these good deeds of precaution and refraining from ambiguous foods make someone judgmental and may think they are superior to the other people who are consuming. They're not doing anything wrong either. They're acting on a par with the Sharia. You've gone one step higher, that's very good. But don't think you're higher than them. You see how a good deed can easily make you complacent, self-conceited, and therefore this pollutes you. And here one has to be careful, therefore. It's very good to do, but keep it to yourself. Don't be a bother to other members in the community. Okay. And the faculty of touch also, touching things which may stimulate haram activities or make you at risk of entering haram activities. I think you've got the gist of what I'm trying to now explain, this silencing of the limbs. There was just one point in relation to this tasting I wanted to add with your permission, and that's in relation to vegan diets, where for months and months maybe you refrain from meat, thus that being a vegetarian diet, and you refrain from meat products or products of cattle, such as milk, yogurt, and so on and so forth. You refrain from everything. That's a vegan diet. Now, do we have vegetarianism or veganism in Islam? There may be elements of it, okay, but in Islam it hasn't been legislated. But there are elements of it. What do I mean? In Islam we have traditions that read, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَأْكُلُ اللَّحْمَ أَرْبَعِينَ يَوْمًا سَاءَ خُلْقُهُ وَإِذَا سَاءَ خُلْقُ أَحَدِكُمْ مِنْ إِنسَانٍ أَوْ دَابَّةٍ فَأْذِنُوا فِي أُذُنِهِ الْأَذَانَ كُلَّهُ. See, we have traditions like this, that it says, look, whoever abandons meat for 40 days. So if you abandon it for 39 days, you haven't gone against the Sharia. If you abandon it for 40 days, you would have gone against the Sharia. It's not haram, but it's deemed abominable. It's deemed makruh. And this being a makruh is something, it means this is an essentially bad action to do, because it ruins your disposition, your khuluq, your ethical dispositions can be impaired. And then the prescription is, whoever impairs their disposition as a result of consuming such foods, or as a result of refraining from consuming meat for 40 days, read the adhan in their ear. The whole adhan, read it in their ear. Why should they read the adhan in their ear? They haven't consumed meat for 40 days. What's the link here? The link is that the adhan is a profession to one's faith, to one's adherence to Islam, to La ilaha illallah, to Muhammadan Rasulullah, and so on and so forth. Here, this is your faith here. you've impaired the content of the adhan, albeit in a spiritual way. You've impaired that, and it's affected your ethical temperament. How? How has that contaminated you in a manner which affects your disposition? And the answer is because this practice is a practice of Christians. Now when I say Christians, I don't mean Lady Maryam alayha salam. Lady Maryam was a Muslim. I'll come to that in a minute. She was a Muslim. We explained this in the first or second lecture, that a Christian is a Muslim but with aberrated doctrine and or actions. One of the aberrated actions of the Christians was in Lent time they would avoid meat for more than 40 days. So look, this builds a Christian dimension within you. You've incorporated a Christian trait, and therefore you'll be resurrected as a Christian. To relieve this, recite the adhan in their ear. So it removes this contamination. And then you won't be resurrected unless you do it again, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, but the point is this, that as I said, there are elements of vegetarianism in Islam, because we have the prescription to have little meat, consume little meat. Some traditions speak of overeating meat has the same effects of intoxicants. Some traditions speak of having meat once every 2 days, once every 3 days, and so on and so forth. So there is a vegetarian dimension therefore here. But there's also a vegan dimension in Islam. Look, the red line is never to pass over the 40-day limit. As long as you do that, you're within the reins of Islam. But there is a vegan aspect we see in the Holy Quran. And that's in chapter 3, verse 37. كُلَّمَا دَخَلَ عَلَيْهَا زَكَرِيَّا. Whenever Zachariah would enter, or whenever he entered upon her, upon Lady Maryam alayha salam, al-mihraba, Lady Maryam was in her chamber, so to speak, the prayer chamber, the mihrab. وَجَدَ إِنْدَهَا رِزْقًا. He perceived before her a provision. Some scholars have used this verse to show that there is a vegan dimension in Islam, but don't compromise it by doing it for more than 40 days. Lady Maryam, the traditions speak of her being presented with, by Allah, with summer fruits in the winter and with winter fruits in the summer. And Zachariah would see this. The verse says, كُلَّمَا دَخَلَ عَلَيْهَا. Whenever, meaning every time Zachariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, but every time, كُلَّمَا, this suggests that it's indicative of long periods, most probably more than 40 days. That's one point. And here the term provision, rizqa, is used in the indefinite sense. And when that happens, it means it's a provision which is outside, is not the norm of the people of that time, of that season. That the people in a given season having such a provision, when it's mentioned in the indefinite sense, it shows that this provision is outside the norm that the people are used to. And in the traditions, it speaks of her having winter fruits, but in the summer, or summer fruits in the winter. So look, she was feeding off fruits all this time. And it passed 40 days. And thus, that is the vegan dimension here. Now, that was at that period of time. If someone wanted to do that now, in the Muhammadan Ummah, with the Muhammadan protocol, there's one limitation to it. It shouldn't pass 40 days. Because that's become abrogated. But abrogation doesn't mean what Lady Maryam did was wrong. No. It's like cancer therapy. It has phases. Each phase is perfect for that time. What she did was perfect and was on a par with Islam at that time. Now though, to even commit to a more perfect protocol, you can also have a vegan diet, but don't let it pass 40 days. Before it reaching the 40-day limit, consume meat. But the best way is to have the meat, but not every day. Maybe once every 2 days or 3 days. As long as you control yourself and tame your animal dimension. And this too is one way of silencing your limbs. There are other aspects too, the inner faculties. For example, the thinking faculty that also needs silencing. One's memory, it's an inner faculty, needs silencing. One's imaginative faculty needs silencing. Now maybe tomorrow we'll discuss, because we're approaching the demise of Lady Khadija alayha salam, we may speak on 1 or 2 days on women's issues, different issues, and then we may come back to this, or we may just continue from there on a new subject. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.